Support for Flying Valiant Builds is brought to you by 1st and 64th Customs on YouTube, where no diecast is safe. Video Geek Productions. All business, all geek. A generous grant from the Jonathan Vonesh Foundation. And from support from viewers like you. Please like, share, and subscribe. Alright, you can do this. I will not do golf livery. I will not do golf livery. I will not do golf livery. Hey there folks, Chuck here, and it's another month and another Three Blind Mice build, and this time around, Lee, George, and Paul gave us the Porsche 917 LH, and yeah, it's kind of hard to look at this thing and not think golf livery, and it's also not exactly the kind of car that I typically build because I prefer mass-produced stuff, because it's a lot easier to do a what-if mass-produced car than cars that are so distinct they all have their own unique liveries and stories and all exist somewhere in the world. So I decided to take this in a completely different direction. I'm a big fan of cyberpunk and dieselpunk and steampunk and all kinds of weird sci-fi punk stuff, and wanted to take this in kind of a Blade Runner / Geiger direction, you know, a little alien influence, and turn this thing into the spaceship that it looks like it is. So that's the plan. It is 9:47 right now on the day that this video is due, so let's boogie. It was pretty easy to strip the car down, but once I got the paint off, I realized how incredibly ghastly the casting lines on my particular casting were. I also noticed pretty quickly that the headlights for this particular casting were not fully formed. They didn't reach the end of the covers, so there was a bit of an error or something in the casting of the plastic. That ended up influencing what I did with the headlights later, and you'll see that in a bit. I'm getting a little better at using the jeweler's saw. I was able to use a flat blade to get the top part of the door off, and it immediately flew away and was never seen again. So I had to get creative and make a replacement piece for that. I know that the doors on this car famously fold forward, but since I was building this into a hover car and it's got that interesting kind of step fender to it, I thought if I take the door apart, split it in half, and fold the bottom part down, it kind of looks like the steps on the side of a private jet. And then I could take the top and make it into a gull wing and take the window with it. So that's how the passengers enter and leave, is through a double folding door. I found a thin piece of styrene that was already almost exactly the width that I needed. I just needed to file it slightly to fit. And a little activator and some CA glue, and bam, replacement door. Don't ask me how many times it came off while assembling. It was a lot. I am famously kind of rough with my cars when I'm working on them, and not always as careful as to where I put my hands. That's one of the reasons why I do weather builds so well, is because I can be like, yeah, I meant to do that. Anyway, enough secrets for me. It was pretty easy to separate the window from the rest of the assembly, and then I took one of the headlights, the one that was the most deformed, completely out, and ended up designing a 3D printed custom headlight to go in there. I also went on Thingiverse and found a whole bunch of bits and bobs and resized them and modified them slightly, and then it was off to the Anycubic Photon to print them all out. It was so satisfying watching that go in. Once I got 3 or 4 rounds of printing underway, it was time to test fit and see what I had to work with. I had quite a few ideas of where I could go with it. I cut the rear wing off pretty early and knew that I wanted to have rockets down the back. It was also a good way to hide that also hideous casting line on the back, but I was already planning to put rockets back there. And I found these really cool ones, these jet engines that wrapped around something, and they wrapped around the fin like perfectly. It was like they were meant for this casting. I also found this weird kind of power generator thing that I put on the back, and that was just an excuse because I wanted to have something kind of copper on the top of the car. I don't get to use copper much in my builds, so there's any chance I have to try a copper, bronze, or gold, I'm going to take it because usually those don't come up. I filed the base of the car flat and found all these really cool vents and propellers and stuff to make it look like intakes and support jets for the 4 main hover wheels. I found these really cool Gaslands hover wheels that somebody designed. I'll look it up and link in the description below, but it was really like absolutely perfect. I think I made them 15% larger than the original model just to fill the area better. And the rest of the stuff was pretty easy to just resize based on caliper measurements and going, okay, I know I want to have some round vents here and some square vents there. And I'm really happy with this resin printing. It takes CA glue very, very well, and it does paint very well also. The only drawback is it does tend to get fuzzy when you sand it, so you have to be careful as to what's actual fuzz and what's just clouding from sanding. I took some diamond plate and made steps on the inside of the door to make it look a little more finished. It was at this point I did some test fitting and realized just how much of a gap. There was a huge gap between the interior bucket and the chassis, and that's because the windows are very, very thick. So I had to come up with something to fill that gap. I also printed out this teeny tiny CRT monitor and keyboard to add some Blade Runner-esque sci-fi nonsense. I knew I wanted to have a lot of cables running all over this car. I'm a big fan of Dr. Cranky's Laboratory on YouTube. He makes a lot of rat rods, and he's been doing these really amazing hover cars recently, and so there's some cable dangling that I do on this and some gizmology, as he calls it, that's kind of a tribute to him, and he's been a huge influence on me for years. I followed him back on the old Model Builders forum like 15 years ago plus. He and Ken Hamilton were a huge influence on my building style, and I have both of their books, and it's really kind of cool to have those on the shelf and just marvel at the reference material that they provide. This is also the first time I gave Createx Sealer a try instead of regular aerosol primer. I love it. I am not going back. It was really easy to apply and takes paint fantastically. And it's ultimately way cheaper than the Tamiya primer that I was using. I didn't show shooting it black because that wasn't very exciting. I wanted to start with a black base and dry brush everything on because I wanted to have a metallic finish to this car. And yes, I know it was made of fiberglass, but the real cars also didn't fly and have double fold gull wing doors. So we're just going to roll with it. I wanted to use as many different varieties of metallics as possible to make it stand out. So I started with the MSP blackened steel with tarnished steel for highlights and some silver. And I also used metallic burnt iron to create some low lights. This was also my first chance to try working with lead wiring to add details. I wanted to have a lot of Cyberpunk style cables and wires running everywhere, and the stuff that I've seen people do with lead wires is just incredible, and I understand the principle of why it works, and I love the look that it provides, but I am still pretty gun shy of working with lead directly, so I gloved up. If you're working with lead, I highly recommend you do the same, or you make sure that you don't touch your face while using it and immediately wash your hands very thoroughly afterwards. This wire was very easy to shape and mold. I used the extra thin wire to braid it together to create braided cables and the medium-sized wire to do runs around the outside of the car. And then I took the braided wires and painted every other loop red and then went back over with blue. One of the fun challenges of this build was having competing color schemes because I wanted to have a color scheme for the car when it was lit by normal light and then a completely different color scheme when it was lit by a black light. So the main color scheme of the daylit car is more reds and blues and a little rust around the areas like the guns and the hatches, and then all the vibrant blacklight colors when you hit the black light. I decided I wanted to give one of the cables more of a tube feel, so I used turn signal amber to give it a little bit of depth. I really liked how it turned out, but I kept forgetting it was there, and it dries very, very slowly, so I kept hitting it and having to repaint it. The typhus corrosion came in handy for doing quick rust, because I wasn't going to focus much on rust on this, but there were things like the guns and the hatches that I felt needed to have some kind of steel look to them, and maybe this vehicle operates in a damp environment, and so it gets corrosion on the non-aluminum, non-titanium parts of it. I did some safety yellow on the main thruster in the middle of the car and on the step to give it some visibility, but I didn't want the steps to glow. I had something else in mind at this point. The Rise of Rust went very lightly over the typhus corrosion because I didn't want the rust to draw too much attention. I just wanted it to look good and gritty. I also got in the mail recently the copper colored pencil from AK Interactive, and I wanted to try it out on this generator. I didn't have very much luck with it, unfortunately. It was not really doing what I wanted, so I got out this warm penny paint and went over that, and that really kind of provided more what I was looking for. I'm not saying that it is a bad product. I'm probably just using it wrong. Again, I really wanted to play with all my different metallics, so I busted out this tin craft paint that I also don't use very much, and I was actually quite impressed with it. I think I'll use this again. It would make a really good worn aluminum or unpolished aluminum. I also was really struggling with what to color the jet tubing that came out of the car, and then I found this metallic pearlescent white, and it was perfect for what I wanted. Well, I say it was perfect, and then I found a way to make it more perfecter, better. All right, time for the blacklight paint. This is what we came here for. This stuff I got online. It's pretty easy to work with, although I did learn an important lesson with working with blacklight paint, and that's that you really need to be working under a blacklight when you're painting it. This stuff went on very easy, but the part that I didn't understand working with blacklight paint is that even if you can't see it, if the faintest bit of any of it gets anywhere, it's going to show up under a blacklight. And then I spent way too much time off camera retouching everything, because anywhere that like the slightest drip of this stuff showed up, it was like a blaring speck in the middle of like the dark steel, dark metal of the car. I know you won't really be able to see it from the outside, but I wanted to put a few blacklight dots on the instrument panel so it does glow a little bit. And if you look very carefully, you can see it. I also love these vents in the front and wanted them to kind of glow like they were feeding the thrusters. So I had like different color schemes for the different parts of the thrusters. So there were yellow vents on the outer corners of the car, and then the orange feeds the actual hover things, and then the red on the back is the thrusters, and blue is the central fan that runs through the middle of the car, and green is the guns, and pink is more indicators. I didn't stick hard and fast to it, like obviously that green bar in the back is not a gun, but you know, I had like 6 colors to work with, so some repeats were going to happen. But basically anywhere I thought air would be flowing, I wanted to have a glow coming out of it. I tried adding some green pigment to tarnish up the copper a little bit and put some pigment fixer on it, and it looked okay, but I think I went over it later and it kind of went away. I used Mod Podge to hold the windshield in place and then sealed everything up, because at this point, everything that I was going to do needed the car to be together. So I drilled a hole to mount the car, because obviously this car can't really sit on the ground the way I'm building it. And as I was drilling the hole, the hatch knob hit the tip of the Dremel tool and flew away, and I never saw it again. Actually, I was able to find it again a day later and get it reattached. But then it was time to add the wires to all the holes that I drilled, and these are just, basic 20 gauge wires that I had in my spare parts bin, and I found some braided cable from picture hanging, and I used some more lead wire to kind of join the top and bottom of the car together so that it kind of flowed like one organism almost. I just love this is again like a direct ripoff of Dr. Cranky's style, as he has these hover cars with all these hanging wires, and it's just such a cool look. And so I just wanted to emulate that a little bit. He does it a lot better than I do, and I probably should use thinner wire. So if I do it again, I'll find some thinner stuff, but for this I was just having fun. It was kind of a cycle of touch things up, add more blacklight paint, touch things up, add more blacklight paint at this point. Then it was time to do some rust wash on some key areas that I felt like rust would be, and this was where I had an amazing happy accident, because I liked the white pearlescent, and then I hit the copper thing, and then I just kind of on a whim put it on the white, and I really love how the rust wash worked with the pearlescent paint and kind of gave it this almost like glazed caramel look. I don't know how to describe it. It just looks perfect for this vehicle. I was so happy with how that turned out. I made sure as I worked to periodically hit things with a matte clear either via brush or airbrush. I sealed everything up, but before I did, I kind of did a purposefully sloppy mask using this liquid mask from Green Stuff World. This stuff is fantastic. I really love working with it. I did it purposefully sloppy so that there would be a lot of clouding around the windows to make it look like this thing was flying through a lot of different temperature shifts and had some condensation. And then it was time to do some decals, and this is where I started having a lot of fun, because as I was thinking of 80s cyberpunk and just 80s stuff in general, I keep thinking of Domino's Pizza. I think it's just because it's a brand I grew up with in the 80s, and I thought it would be really funny to make this really high-tech gizmology covered vehicle into a pizza delivery vehicle. So I reworked the Domino's Pizza logo to give it a little more cyberpunk feel, grabbed some different styles of jet engine warning signs and indications, redid them, made sure that the doors warned that the driver carries less than $20 in cash, and went to town. I'm really happy with how these decals turned out. I can only print decals in clear backing or white backing right now, and I can't print white, although I know that Paul of Three Blind Mice fame has been doing a series on printing decals and how you can print in white, and I'm really excited about that. I want to learn more. So I'm hoping that as my channel grows and as I get more patrons, I can use that money to save up and buy one of these printers that can print white decals, and I'll be able to make white decals for myself and share them with my patrons. I ended up with an unconventional solution for the huge gap between the door and the interior tub. I noticed that it was just about wide enough to fit a Q-tip barrel, and I had these plastic Q-tips. So I realized it really doesn't matter if it fills the area as much as it looks like it fills the area. So that dropped right in, and I decided to make it some kind of glowing tube, like maybe that's an indicator light that comes on when the door is open. And then once the decals were on, it was time for another quick mask and respray of clear coat. And I dropped it into the dehydrator that I keep by my paint booth for a quick dry before getting back to work. Here you can see I painted the Q-tip barrel in a bright pink as an indicator. And this was where I started playing with the different clear coats. I picked up this new Ultra Matte because I like the matte clear coat from Vallejo, but I wanted something flatter, and it still has like the slightest sheen to it. And so I bought this online, and I've tried it out, and it's okay. It's definitely flatter than the regular matte clear, but I'm still looking for something that might do even more. I've heard AK Interactive has a really good Ultra Matte, but it's really hard to get a hold of right now. I used this MIG streaking brush because it's called Starship Grime, and I realized really quickly this was a very difficult brush to work with. I think these are based on eyelash barrels or something, but they don't stand up very well. You have to really keep an eye on them, or you will knock them over very easily. But it has a really cool kind of greenish black vibe that provided some very nice subtle details in parts. I also brought out this AK Interactive engine oil to give it some nice grimy finishes on things like the central vents and around that pink tube to give it a little bit of grime. It's kind of a cool finish because it goes on a lot like a clear coat, but it's tinted, so you get kind of a orangey brown clear to it. And I went around all the different jets to make sure they looked good and greasy. And then it was time for the decal, and to give this its official 0011 designation, and put it on its stand. Oh, by the way, did I mention I made a stand? It turned out pretty cool, if I do say so myself. I used a lot of stuff I found on Thingiverse and some junk pieces that I had lying around, and oh yeah, I made some pizza too. That was a lot of fun to make. I didn't have time to actually paint the stand, but I kind of wanted the stand to kind of be in the background anyway for at least this, since it's not really part of the build. The Porsche is. So once again, speaking of Porsches, here's what we started out with. I really don't have much to say about it. It's a Porsche 917 and is a little limiting if you're looking at it strictly as a car, but if you're looking at it as a platform for something else, it can give you something like this. I need a better place to photograph my sci-fi cars. Anyway, this is it. I'm going to show you some blacklight versions of it and some glamour shots. You can find a lot more of that stuff over on my Instagram at Flying Valiant. I'll be posting a bunch of photos of it because it photographs really, really well. A lot better than it videos. But before you go check that out, I would like to thank my patrons at the Rockford level, Mid-Island Custom Diecasts. Thanks again, Evan. my amazing wife Carolyn, who is allowing me to make 2 videos in one day, which was a silly proposition, and I will probably do it again, even though I'm promising myself right now I will never do it again. I'd also like to thank my Douglas level patrons, the Drew Rants and Raves podcast, Jordan Kleinhenn, and Curtis Crafts on YouTube. You can find a link to everybody's stuff in the description below. Once again, thank you to everybody who has supported this channel and subscribed and liked and commented. If you want to see me build the stand further and detail it, let me know in the comments below, because I've got plenty of other stuff to work on, but it would be really fun to detail it now that I've got the vehicle done. And if you have the means and the opportunity, I would really appreciate your support over at patreon.com/flyingvaliant. And if you can't help, a like and subscribe is free and really helpful to this channel as it grows. So I'm going to wrap things up and get back to editing because I need to get this thing done, and it's 10:14 p.m. now. So once again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming along with me for the ride. So until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.